Let's begin by looking at how we measure the climate impact of a company. As you can see here in the diagram, we illustrate the standard way to measure greenhouse gas emissions for a business, and the business's emissions are put into what we call scopes. I'm sure some of you have already heard about this. And for scope 1, we're talking about all direct emissions. So direct production of greenhouse gas emissions from sources owned or controlled by the company. So these are ones that you are producing. So you're producing these emissions on your site or in something you own. And quite often it's the smallest emission scope for many non-industrial businesses. An example might be gas boilers that you're burning, gas that you're burning on site to produce greenhouse gas emissions. Could be your company-owned vehicles. The business is, if the business is buying petrol and producing greenhouse gas emissions from their vehicle, that's in your scope 1. And it could also include what we call fugitive emissions. So there's emissions that escape, like refrigerant leaks. So if you use a lot of fridges, there's also those emissions as well. And then we have what we call scope 2, our indirect emissions from energy. And these are greenhouse gas emissions from electricity purchased and used by your organization. And these emissions are created during the production of the energy, so burning of the coal, but they're not produced on the business site. So an example of this would be the electric used to power your equipment in your office. Okay. And then finally, we have got scope 3. So these are the indirect emissions in the value chain. And these are from sources not owned or directly controlled by your company. So basically your supply and your value chain. And for many companies, the majority of their greenhouse gas emissions are from scope 3. And they're quite difficult to measure because they lie outside of your operations. So a little bit also outside of your control as well. So the question often arises, where do you put the boundaries on those emissions? And that can be quite a difficult call. You could go as far as including the energy used when customers drive to your restaurant or to the place where they're eating your food, or like Clipper Tea, for example. They include when their customers boil the kettle at home. So it's a bit of a tricky one in terms of how you would draw the line. There are some other examples as well. So if you think about the upstream, which is before you sell your product onto the distributor, that could be the farmers in the way they grow the crops. It could be your business travel and your commute and how much traveling you're doing. And then when it comes to the downstream, it's when your products have been sent to the distributors, and that could be things like transportation.